only way we know how. Our guy Greg Auman from Fox Sports. I've been just listen. I was one of those guys, Greg, because knowing that half of my family are Jets fans, I was like buyer beware when it came to Todd Bowles, because I saw how it just broke down. And the leaders were like, I don't know if this is going to work. Greg, you can speak to this as well as anybody. The last 2 years in the middle of the season, this team did not play great football, but they've been able to bounce back. But I don't know about you, but I haven't heard one inkling of from the players. And fans are a different story, but nothing from the players, nothing sources inside the Bucs locker room question Todd Bowles and his leadership and his coaching. I mean, he's got to get some kind of credit and some kind of love for his performances. I think he too often gets a ton of the blame and not enough credit.
No, and I think that's kind of his personality. He's not a me guy. He's not a guy who's asking for credit or love or anything like that. I mean, they've won 3 straight division titles. It hasn't been the best division in football by any means, but before he was head coach, the Bucs had never won a division title 2 years in a row, and he's done it 3 in a row. He's got more wins each year. So yeah, it's one of those where, I mean, I think people like Liam Coen right now, and there's a lot of people that want you to move Bowles aside to make sure you keep Coen. Cohen's been a great OC. We have no idea who he'd be as a head coach. I think we've seen who Todd Bowles is a head coach, and it speaks to how, I guess, how high the bar has been set in Tampa for Bucs fans, that they're not happy with 8, 9, 10 wins and 3 division titles and at least 1 playoff win in those 3 years. Yeah, again, I get why people are frustrated. I think they want probably more consistency from his defense. But again, he's the head coach of the whole team. You can't, if you like what Liam Coen has done, you also have to appreciate that Todd's the guy that brought him here and saw him as a good fit, as he saw Canales as a good fit a year ago. So part of being a head coach is assembling a good staff, and he's done that 2 years in a row now by bringing in guys that are getting coveted as head coaches elsewhere.
Yeah, it's funny too, because like I remember being up in the press box, and I know you do, when these games were getting blacked out, and the TV feed on the top wasn't even like a real like TV feed. It was just a video feed of the game so we can watch it. Like times have changed. You're right. And you're looking at this Tampa Bay Buccaneers team, not as one of the most futile franchises in all sports, but a team that is the only NFC squad to make the playoffs 5 years in a row. So times certainly have changed. And I asked Ian this yesterday. I want to ask you this. When Mike Evans, I feel like, and you know this being here in Tampa, I feel like now is the time where Buccaneers fans are as proud of this team and how it's run as any time in franchise history. Now, I'm not discrediting the Dungy years and things like that, and there's only one first, and there were so many good players and Hall of Famers. But as far as right now goes, where you're transition from Tom Brady, you have a guy like Jason Light who embraces social media. He's holding the duck, right? They get Mike Evans the record. I feel like when you go from a laughing stock, which it was probably 7, 8 years ago, to now, I mean, there's people on social media talking about, I can't believe the Buccaneers are acting like this. And Todd Bowles getting game balls on Good Morning Football for doing things like that. It's been a complete 180 for this franchise as a whole. It's crazy.
Yeah, and I think it's even commendable just how well they've kind of weathered post-Brady. I mean, you had Tom Brady as your quarterback, and he left, and they weren't necessarily in a good cap situation to handle not having Tom Brady on their team. So I think the fact that he's been gone and they've actually won more games in each year, despite the kind of the budget crunch and the cap crunch they're under, says something. I mean, you have to do that. I think everyone was talking about how Brady came here and he changed the culture and changed the expectation, and it's true, but he's now 2 years removed from this team.
Yeah.
And it's still kind of the right. I mean, it would be easy if all he did was like, hey guys, this is how you win. Take care. Bye. The wheels would fall off and they wouldn't do it. And I mean, I think you have a whole nother generation of leaders on this team now in younger guys like Winfield and Wirfs. Mayfield isn't a young guy, but he's a new guy. And I think that's helped. I think that you've seen it's hard to forge a new identity post Brady. And I think Baker's been a really good guy for that, in that he's in many ways kind of an anti-Brady. He's not a world superstar. He's an everyday kind of guy who wants to line up with the offensive lineman and joke with the defensive players. And I think that's worked out well. I think if you needed a foil to Brady, if you needed a new identity, he's kind of helped do that. And I think a lot of the things Tom did worked really well here. And he had a great 3-year run, even didn't end the best way here. But to see Baker come here when he didn't necessarily have a whole lot and to turn things around, to get a contract. And then honestly, I think everybody's worried, if Baker gets a $100 million contract, is he going to be the same guy? He was better.
Yeah.
And he's still doing ridiculous scrambling and running and giving his body up when the team needs it. There's no, it's kind of like there's no selfishness on his part. So it's neat to see. And I think that spills over. I think that, I think he had that play early on Sunday where he went down and kind of took a hit and it kind of led to a skirmish back and forth. And you saw the guys that had his back. People are throwing punches just because you kind of took a late shot. He went down a little late. It wasn't like it was an obvious thing, but I think it showed how well they have his back. And if you mess with him, if you do anything that even looks like a late hit, they're going to come at you. And they kind of had a spark that came from that.
Yeah, I think whether it's a business or whatever kind of endeavor, but especially in sports, you take on the characteristics of your leaders, right? And I think the way that the Buccaneers take on the characteristics of Todd Bowles is they don't get too high, they don't get too low. I mean, maybe sometimes they get too high, or there's they go through these losing streaks, but they're able to come back. They're able to keep things in perspective, but they also play with that type of fire like Baker does of. If our guy that's a 6-foot quarterback is running for 12 yards and lowering his helmet for the last 2, like nobody else is tapping out. Nobody else is, running out of bounds, before they hit that first down marker. I want to ask you about Mike Evans. And I saw, and I appreciate you reposting my video of the players. Yeah. Mike is a guy, and I've covered, and like yourself, we've covered all the teams here in the Tampa Bay area. I don't want to say Mike's like he's still a little bit guarded, right? You said like you're going to the casino, you ain't going where I go, and like he's not like the most, like he doesn't talk to everybody. He's not like having these like private conversations for 20 minutes. We see players like that where you could just sit by their locker and you could talk forever. Mike's not necessarily like that, but you listen to how people talk about Mike Evans. Devin Colt told me that the first guy that went up to him after he got his first catch was Mike Evans. Payne Durham just says, like, he never treated me like a rookie, like a guy that didn't belong. Like, just your experience of being around Mike Evans and just hearing what those players had to say about him.
Yeah, it's neat. I mean, he's probably, as much as anybody, I miss Levante's rookie year. So he's probably the guy that I would point to as somebody who, like, I've covered his entire career. I've missed, a handful of games last couple of years, but for the most part, I've been there for just about everything he's done. And it's been neat to see his growth, and that Mike was so young when he came here to Tampa and still a dad and still a husband, but just completely young and raw and had to find himself, and learn some of that from Vincent Jackson those early years. Very quickly was kind of seen as a leader on this team. So now to see him in year 11, the number of coaches he's been through, the long slog that he had before he ever got to a playoff game. It's guys like Levante, I think, that you appreciate because they went, Mike went, his first six years without a playoff game. And that's half your career. And you don't know if you're going to get that. And Mike still liked Tampa enough and liked this team enough that he signed on. He got paid well, don't get me wrong. But if he was worried about winning or worried about this team's future, he could have gone somewhere else that he thought was closer to a Super Bowl. He did that before Brady was here. So to see him now, it's neat. And that this streak has been such a big part of who he is. I can remember, the first time you looked it up in terms of, it was 6 years was the most to start a career, and matching Randy Moss and beating that, to have it keep going. And I think because he hasn't always had 1,300 yards, he's had a couple of years where it's tight like this, and he's had injuries. And certainly this year, when he got hurt, it's like week, through the bye, and he's at 335 yards, like you're barely a third of the way there. And you kind of tell people, all he'd have to do is average 96 yards a game. It's certainly possible. But again, it's like if it gets hurt at all, if things don't go his way, that looked like a goner. So to see it come back, and then even Sunday, I think going to the fourth quarter, he still needed like 45 yards, where it's like, not sure. So for him, for everything to come together for him the way it did, for the Bucs to get the win, for him to be involved. That late drive when they're trying to salt things away, that's a 3rd and 9 that he converts, where if he doesn't get that catch and move the chains, they're punting the ball back to the Saints up 1 with like 6 minutes to go. And the Saints are probably getting the ball maybe at their 40. So for him to be so central, I think he had three catches on Sunday where he converted a 3rd and 9, a 3rd and 10, 3rd and 9. And like that's more third and long conversions than he'd have all season. He had 2 all year, and he had 3 in one day. So for it to come together, and then it really looked like when Bucky went in, it really looked like he'd sacrificed, and it looked like Mike was going to be at 995, which is so cruel to get that close and not get it. And you could see it was neat. And that Baker was talking about guys coming off the field, and it's like you just scored a touchdown to put you up 8 and what would clinch a division title if you win. And they're coming off the field like their dog died. Like it's just like, oh,
you heard it. You heard it in the stands too. Everybody was like,
they're at the 12, they're at the 11-yard line. Like, hey man, there's only 11 yards left. Mike's got to get 5 of them.
Yep.
There's a minute 51 left, So it was neat, and that the defense very much had that. Not only do they have to stop the Saints here, they have to find a way to get the ball back to the offense. It's just for one play. That's all they had. That's all it took. So it was really neat. Like I said, Mike's a guy that's so easy to root for. With everything he's gone through in his life, to come out of that and be the guy that he is just remarkable. So that's why the NFL doesn't part with money. Teams don't part with money lightly, and that's why they're going out of their way to do something they know gives him an extra $3 million. You can do a lot with $3 million in the NFL, and they want to make sure Mike got it, and that's who he is.
Yeah, I mean, you look at Cooper Rush, and I put a video out yesterday from the program, and I was saying that the Buccaneers taught the Dallas Cowboys something yesterday.
Right.
Of Dallas, who makes more money than any team in all of sports all over the world. No, it's not Real Madrid, it's not Barcelona, Manchester United, the Yankees, the Lakers. No, it's the Dallas Cowboys, and yet they're pinching pennies on their backup quarterback. And here's the Buccaneers doing whatever it takes to get $3 million to their aging 30-year-old wide receiver. And just like you mentioned, everybody was on the same page. And I think that has been such an underlying factor of this team's success. And it's everybody. It's not just Mike. It's not just Baker. It's everybody. And now we get to the point of the year where you wonder, all right, what's the future looking like for some of these guys? And, 2 big names that we've heard the last couple of days have been Mike Greenberg, linked with the Jets job up in New York. And I'm sure a lot of people are going to be asking, hey, how are things there in Tampa? Do you want to be the guy that's running the whole show? Come here and do it. And also Liam Coen, of course, offensive coordinator for the Buccaneers. We saw Dave Canales, who did do nearly as good of a job as Liam Coen, getting the head coaching job at Carolina. He may have been the 475th choice, but that's neither here nor there. What are the likelihood? What are the chances that Mike Greenberg and Liam Coen will not be with the Buccaneers in 2025, 2026?
Yeah, you don't know. It's one of those where Jets are talking to a lot of people, so you don't really know who Mike's up against. But he's a guy that has been here in Tampa for 15 years, has done everything to be a central part of their success. Working the cap, negotiating contracts. He got his start with the Jets. That's home for him. So you totally would get it. Jets aren't necessarily a great situation with Woody Johnson. That GM's either going to have Aaron Rodgers at the very end or some semblance of a rookie quarterback. But it's a tough job in a tough town. So, I mean, it's something where I think it would be a good fit for Mike Greenberg. He'd be a great guy to get that team moving in the right direction. And it would be neat to see what he could do with his own front office. I think he'd want to surround himself with, as he has here, with really smart football people and on the scouting side of things. But in terms of knowing how to manage an NFL team and knowing how to work the books and pull off all kinds of cap wizardry, he's the best. So you certainly, again, I think Bucs fans, it's so easy for Bucs fans to not want these guys to leave. But I think you have to want the guys that are so central in your team's success, you want them to have their own personal success, even if that means going somewhere else and getting a better job somewhere else. With Liam Coen, Liam's the opposite. Liam's been here a year. It's kind of like Canales. It's wild to see these guys come here and a year later be in position to be getting head coaching jobs. And I think Liam has had an awareness, we kind of saw it with Ben Johnson, and that maybe you don't have to jump at the first head coaching job that's offered to you. It might not be the best job. And I don't know whether, Liam's going to be in the mix for many of these 5 openings right now. There could be 6 or 7. Yeah, you don't necessarily want to jump at the worst of them. But I mean, again, for Dave Canales, I don't fault Dave Canales at all for going to Carolina. It's a nasty situation, a bad ownership. But he probably got $30 million guaranteed to go there. And if you can do that, if you can give yourself, even if it's not an ideal situation, if you're a coach that's aspired to be a head coach in the NFL and you get that offer and you get generational money where your grandkids aren't ever going to have to ever worry about anything financially. If you can do that for your family, that's a really hard thing to turn down. and you have to have some real confidence in your own future to not take that opportunity when it's offered to you. So I don't know where Liam Coen, he's got his first interview request with the Jaguars. Again, not a great situation. But again, it's one where, yeah, they can turn it around. You got a good quarterback there in Trevor Lawrence. You'll have some cap flexibility. It sounds like the GM is still there, which probably limits that job a little bit. But you can't fault a guy if that's what he goes to. I mean, if for some reason he gets a call from the Patriots, he's as Northeast a guy as there is. He's a UMass guy and a Rhode Island guy, and New England is who he is. So if somehow the Patriots called and the team that you rooted for your whole childhood wants you to be their head coach, there's not a lot that would keep you from taking that offer. And you'd certainly want him to be able to embrace that and run at it if he could.
Yeah, it's funny when people say that, like, man, don't you love working in Tampa? I'm like, yeah, my whole family lives in New York. But they're like, well, what if you got a job with the Rangers or the Yankees or something like that? I'm like, it's like gonna be a tough discussion. It's
Yeah.
tough, man, because like we grow up as sports fans, right? Before you ever get into being a writer or being a coach or a player, like a lot of times you're a pretty big sports fan, right? And this is like your formative years. So it's easy to say, oh no, it's for us, we're like, no, Liam, you can't. How could you leave? How could you leave this? But you're right. I mean, if he has the opportunity to, have the same job that Bill Belichick had, right? Like it's tough to think that he wouldn't take that. But we'll certainly see. I like what you said at the beginning there with Ben Johnson. I feel like and we don't know, right? But I feel like Liam's in that same spot where I think he's in a spot where he's like, all right, I think I got something good here. And good on Dave Canales for taking that job, because I think he realized, like, hey, we were still 32nd in rushing. And you remember this, week 18 last year, he was like, we're still trying to find our identity. That's not really what you want to hear going into the final game of the season when you need to win to make the playoffs, that your OC doesn't know the identity of the team. It's refreshingly transparent, especially after what we just heard from Byron Leftwich. But it was just like, all right, Dave. And I think you were the same ilk of like, I thought Dave Canales was going to be a better head coach and offensive, like a play caller, because he's what is he, a optimist bully? That's what
Yeah, that's
Baker
what
Mayfield
Baker
calls him.
always is. Yeah.
He's a great guy. Dave Canales is a great dude. But I feel like Liam Coen understands, like, we got something good here. Maybe it's not going to be full time, but I think he does take that same path as Ben Johnson, going, nah, I don't know. They still have their GM, Trent Baalke. And Shad Khan said yesterday on the call that if the new coach wants a new GM, he'll think about it. Who the hell says that? That's just the weirdest thing. And Trent Baalke was on the call. Like, what the hell is going on? I wouldn't want any part of the Jacksonville Jaguars. That's going to be a wild thing. Before I get you out here, I want to talk a little bit more about the Buccaneers, Washington on Sunday. What do you think the key is? I mean, the easy thing is to say contain Jayden Daniels, but what do you think the key is outside of that for the Buccaneers to come out on top and win yet another playoff game?
Yeah, I mean, I think even more so than I had really thought they would run the ball more against the Saints. And then like the first half, it was like Mayfield had 16 passes and I think Bucky had 4 carries. That's probably what this team does best, is run the ball and ride that offensive line. And Washington is not a good run defense. They're a bottom 10, bottom 5 run defense. So as well as Mayfield has worked and as well as the passing game has worked, I don't think they can run the ball enough against
All right.
Washington. I think keeping Jayden Daniels off the field is important. I think one of the best things the Saints did in that first half is they kept the Bucs off the field. It was like halfway through the second quarter, they had like 11 offensive plays. And I think the more that you can keep Jayden Daniels off the field, keep control of the game is important. I think early on Sunday, it was like, they weren't necessarily clicking. The last 2 games, they've kind of had some field goals when they wanted touchdowns. So red zone's important too. Like if you can get out and get ahead and force Jayden Daniels to pass a lot, he's still really dangerous. He's not a guy you want to face in the playoffs, but I think it takes them out of their strength and it forces them into uncomfortable situations. And as much as this Bucs defense has struggled to get takeaways, if you can get a 10-point lead on Washington and force a rookie to throw more often than he wants to, that's what will lend itself to turnovers and moving on. So again, it definitely starts with establishing the run the ball 30 times, give Bucky Irving 20 touches as a game plan. And then, from there, they've really won games without turnovers at all, without
Mm-hmm.
taking the ball away from the other team. And if they're going to have any kind of extended playoff run, they have to get back to that. They got to get 2-3 takeaways a game and short fields and make it easy for this offense.
Yeah, I love to see Rashad get in the game. I know no touch is a little surprising to some people, and I think that was just kind of the flow of the game. You didn't, you weren't trying to run the ball. You're trying to get Mike the record. I think that was, of course, I don't think he's going to run the ball more than Bucky Irving. He's the clear cut RB1 now, but I just think some of those, you give Bucky a breather, the pass pro, the tough yards. We know that that's kind of Rashad's game there, and end of the game. I know some people are like, why isn't Bucky in there? Well, Rashad does a great job of picking up these blitzes, and he's really good at catching the ball out of the backfield. I know he's got a couple of turnovers, kind of nature of the beast. Before I let you go, I just saw this on social media. Byron Leftwich interviewing today for the New England Patriots head coaching job.
Wow, there you go, big one, Byron. It's like to see. I mean, it's one of those where no one heard from Byron for like 2 years.
He was trying to get into Notre Dame, and Marcus Freeman's like, "We're good, we're good."
Marcus Freeman's like, "I'd rather promote my tight ends coach, thanks." So I saw.
Did he misplay his hand? Like, I don't. I'm sorry to cut you off.
Yeah,
we're talking about like good way to play your hand. Dave Canales, Ben Johnson, Liam Coen. I don't know if anybody's misplayed their hand more than Byron Leftwich, and I hope for his sake, because he always seemed like a good guy, but for some reason, you have these press conferences sometimes, you have these discussions, and sometimes guys change, right? Dirk Cutter was the greatest interview as an offensive coordinator. As a head coach, he was miserable. He was yelling at people, right? And then you have a guy like Byron Leftwich where it didn't seem to jive. This isn't fantasy football, and he's telling us stuff like, these aren't opinions, they're facts. You're not running the football. I don't know if I've ever seen a coach misplay his hand so much and have it like really come back in his face as bad as we've seen with Byron Leftwich.
Yeah, and the unfair thing with Byron is that, I mean, the success they had in 20 and 21, nobody gave Byron Leftwich credit for, in that it was Bruce's offense on one side and it's Tom Brady at quarterback. So they're the two guys that are going to get all the love for the success they had. Better offenses than they had this year in many ways. And then again, 22, again, you're dealing with Brady, who's distracted and declining, and they had no run game at all. And Byron was certainly a part of the problem. But it was surprising that he didn't land anywhere for 2 seasons. The Athletic did a really good story catching up with him, talking about how much he wanted to get back. And he kind of made it clear in that story that it wasn't necessarily what was conveyed publicly. I think publicly it was thought that like he could have had the Jaguars job and wanted his own guy as GM. And he was like, I don't know where that came from. That wasn't true at all. So the idea that he's back in the NFL, I think, is a great thing. I don't know if he's going to go back as a head coach. But if he just gets back as a coordinator, if he's somebody's quarterback's coach, it's good to have him back, and it's good to get him back. And once he does that, I think he'll be able to show who he is again and quickly move up the ranks. He was a guy where, 22 turns out a different way. He could be a head coach in the NFL. Yeah. He had the success. I think he's well liked. We kind of caught him, he wasn't necessarily happy on the podium that last year. And in the way he handled us as the media was probably not the best. But no, he's somebody you want to root for and you want to see back in the game for sure.
Better chance of happening next year, Byron Leftwich as a head coach or Leonard Fournette as a starting running back?
Maybe together. Maybe both of them together.
Maybe together. 2 Jaguars legends in their own right. The one and only Greg Auman, Fox Sports at Greg Auman on all social media platforms. Greg, always appreciate your time. See you Sunday at Ray J, my friend.
Thanks, Jay. Have a good one.
You too, pal.